I want the best open weights model in the world to be a U.S. model.
I think the critical point there is the frontier models are not open sourced.
Good afternoon, everyone. For the ethics lawyers in the audience, I do want to clarify that Emil is the nominee for the Undersecretary of Defense for Research Engineering. He is not yet the Undersecretary. Well, I'm not sure how many of you got to catch my comments this morning, but I flagged AI as one of the fields where the United States has a lead, but we need to maintain that lead, in particular ahead of China. Alphabet and OpenAI obviously are two of the leading research labs in the United States, Alphabet having even invented the transformer sort of architecture. And so I first wanted to start off with a little bit of a bragging session to remind everybody how great American AI is. And the two data points that I want folks to cover are, Kevin, if you can start off with just talking about how ChatGPT has a bajillion monthly active users and keeps growing, and whatever you guys are up to next. And then Ruth, you guys won, I think, basically one of the first Nobel Prizes of AI with AlphaFold. And so I want to hear you guys talk about that. But yeah, Kevin.
All right, so, because Ruth is here, who's written in a Waymo? All right, some folks, they're all over San Francisco, they're coming to DC, you should definitely do it. My first ride in a Waymo was the first minute you're in there, you're like gripping, like, oh my God, watch out for that bicycle. And then your blood pressure comes down, and like 5 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I am living in the future. I'm being driven around San Francisco by a robot. And it's amazing. And then 10 minutes later, you're bored, looking at your phone, and there's an analogy, like all of a sudden this thing that was incredible to you 20 minutes ago is like now just a boring part of your life, and of course robots drive you around San Francisco. And there's an analogy there to AI in general and how we adapt, because who uses ChatGPT? Love it. There are over 500 million people using ChatGPT every week. That's like 7% of the planet that's used ChatGPT in the last 7 days. And we've gone, and it's 2 years old. So you've gone from GPT-3, which at the time was mind-blowing, and now if I asked you all to use GPT-3 inside ChatGPT today, you'd be like, ugh, what is this thing, right? But ChatGPT and it's, the intelligence of models is on a literal exponential curve. It's getting better incredibly quickly, which I think is one of the reasons that people are adopting it so fast, because every few months, computers can do something that computers have never been able to do in the history of the planet. So as a couple examples, we launched our frontier model, O3, just recently. And if you go back a couple versions ago, one of the ways we judge the intelligence of these models is on these benchmarks. There's a competitive programming benchmark. And a couple models ago, this was like 5 months ago, the model was the millionth best competitive coder in the world, which it doesn't sound great, but that's still top 2 or 3% in the world, so that's pretty good. People were using this all over the place to write code in production environments. The previous model, which was like 3 or 4 months ago, was the 1,000th best engineer, competitive coder in the world. O3, which we launched a couple weeks ago, is the 175th best competitive coder in the world. So over the space of 6 months, you've gone from a millionth to 175th, talking about exponentials. It's not going to be long before we're going to have a model that is the best competitive coder in the world. And forever after that point, computers will be better than humans at writing code. But I'm actually excited about that, because if you've seen Hidden Figures, remember the movie? There are a bunch of women helping, do calculations to help compute rocket trajectories to help get us to the moon. And they're writing on pieces of paper, they're calculating rocket trajectories. We look at that as so anachronistic. Of course, people don't do rocket trajectories by hand. Computers do that way better. Coding is going to be the same way. We're going to look a few years from now and say, well, of course computers write code, they're better at it. But by the way, we still have rocket scientists. Rocket scientists are hugely important, and engineering and engineers are going to be hugely important we are just going to be able to move faster. We're going to be able to do more in our personal lives, in business, in government, in national security because of these models, and I could not be more excited.
Nobel Prize, AlphaFold, incredible.
No. So if I go back in time to your point that the U.S. has led in technology, we need to continue leading in technology, and we can't take it for granted. I think that's a really important point. And to put this moment in history in context with AI, I'll go back actually to another one of our colleagues, Vint Cerf, who is the chief internet evangelist at Google. And if you Google him, you will learn that he is described as one of the fathers of the internet. So I asked him this question about how profound is this moment in history. He said he believes that AI has a greater potential than even the internet did. This platform shift is going to be more important because with generative AI, with agents, the potential to augment human capabilities is so profound and endless. And we are very excited. We have AI now with Gemini already, and billions of people around the globe are using it. Thank you for your comments on Waymo. We absolutely love Waymo, and hopefully very soon everyone in DC will be enjoying Waymo. When we look at the implications, it goes to a number of areas, and one, to your question, is about advancing science. So we were extremely proud when Demis Hassabis and John Jumper were awarded the Nobel last fall. And as probably people in this room know, it was for AlphaFold, which is predicting the protein structure for all known proteins known to humanity. And previously, it would take a couple of years just to predict one. They did all 200 million. And that is being described as the single greatest contribution to drug discovery in our lifetime. And that to us is thank you. So what we're really excited about is this opportunity, as Demis has described it, to address many, many diseases in our lifetime. And we're looking at that. We're looking at early detection of disease. You can detect early stage metastatic cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer with AI in ways that augment physicians, radiologists everywhere. And as someone who's been through cancer, I asked my oncologist, and he said, the only way to democratize healthcare for everyone anywhere in the globe to get the same level of diagnosis is with AI. So whether it's the economic uplift, the science benefit, healthcare benefit, it is stunningly transformative.
And Kevin, you guys are also doing some work with some of the national labs, right?
Yeah, I think honestly, it's what Ruth was saying, the capacity for these models to drive fundamental science is one of the most exciting things, because what is the, why is America America? It's because we have entrepreneurship, we have innovation, we're driving scientific innovation, that leads to GDP growth, everybody wins. We have a partnership with the national labs where we're working with Los Alamos, Sandia, Lawrence Livermore, folks like that, have deployed frontier models on a high-side supercomputer. These are folks that are advancing materials science, they're doing fundamental physics research, they're safeguarding our nuclear stockpile, and we have seen them do unbelievable things. They're some of the most sophisticated users of our AI models out there, and humans, great scientists and researchers, plus AI models, move scientific research faster. They discover more things, and if we could invent things 2x faster, 5x faster, 10x faster than we do, think of the good that will do America and the world.
And we're talking about AI, but the next step is really all about quantum AI. And we're extremely excited, to your point, about the application of quantum computing to life sciences and many other applications. And so continuing to maintain the lead of the US is key as this unlock.
So, about a quarter ago, the Chinese released DeepSeek, an open source model that was, sort of highly capable, maybe a generation behind, sort of the leading labs. But by default, as an open source model, it's effectively free for anybody to deploy. This gives them significant soft power if it now gets deployed all across the globe, whether it's in hardware systems that are used for the military or in consumer applications. If that AI is unwilling to recognize the fact that the Tiananmen Square massacres happened, that gives China, sort of a huge advantage. And so, as two of the leading labs, I guess I'm curious how both of you guys think about, are you going to be, sort of releasing open source models? How do you guys think about that relative to the things you keep closed source?
I can start if you want.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we said maybe a month ago, we're going to be releasing an open weights model. We're super excited about it. The way we think about it is, first and foremost, we want to bring AI to the world. We believe deeply in the ability of AI to improve all of our lives. So an open weights model contributes to that. Also, I want the best open weights model in the world to be a U.S. model. I want it to be built on democratic values. I don't want the best open weights model in the world to be a Chinese model. And so from that perspective also, we think it's really important that we put a great model out there. Now, it will not be our frontier model. The way we think about it is probably something like a generation behind, because putting a frontier model out is also accelerative to China. But we think we can put out a great open weights model that the entire world can adopt. So we have a model that the entire world is using built on democratic values. We will also have our full frontier models that'll be a generation ahead that we offer like we do today. And the US will have the best models in the world regardless of how they're used.
I think the critical point there is the frontier models are not open sourced, and it's the smaller models. But I think core to your question is we do need to be very mindful collectively about the conditions to keep the US in the lead, because we've been talking for quite some time that the gap between the US and China, whether it's on models or on chips, has been narrowing. And now we've seen it with DeepSeek, we see it with the Huawei progress on Ascend, on Harmony OS. You see it in a lot of the data around graduates, the ascendancy of universities. And so that's a big concern, and you see it what they're doing on energy, which we should get to at some point. So this is not a foregone conclusion that the US will stay in the lead.
And also, one of the reasons, Emil, why I'm excited for you to formally take on your role as soon as you do, is America has the best models in the world, but it does us no good if those models are sitting on the shelf. Everything that I understand from various conversations is that China is doing a better job today at integrating and deploying and using these models, not just in business, but especially in government, in the military. And it's not just about having the best models. We've got to actually use them, and I think there's a huge opportunity for the US there.
Speaking of keeping the U.S., sort of ahead of, sort of Chinese models, Emil, how do we feel about the fact that, a prominent U.S. venture capital firm, which may or may not have also, fired your former coworker, is choosing to invest into frontier Chinese AI models and funding those with U.S. capital?
It's very curious, to say the least. It's not like there's not a plethora of U.S. companies doing AI to invest in that are high quality. There's big companies that are doing some incredibly innovative stuff, which you don't usually associate with big companies. I mean, our big companies are really innovating quite quickly, and there's a lot of small companies that are doing that, sort of investing in a Chinese AI company, where by definition, the products that they produce are going to be dual use for their Chinese Communist Party and their military, is a curious sort of move to me. So it just doesn't make sense. But I do think it's surprising to us in a way, because the era that hopefully we're at the end of the last era, and the last era was, not to pick on Google, but when Maven was a thing of like, well, should we support the U.S. military's use of our own technologies developed in the U.S.? And I think that era is over, which is good. So I think you'll see a lot of cooperation, not only from OpenAI, but all the big companies here. That's a big positive. And then when our venture capital community, which is trying to invest in innovation, ideally they're doing it here, or at least in allied countries, or else we're going to have some cross incentives that make things weird.
Yeah, I mean, you clearly have such a unique perspective in that, sort of, when confirmed, this won't be your first time, sort of serving for the, sort of department. You flip-flop, sort of back and forth between the department and tech. How do you think about just like, within your seat, what you think needs to, sort of change within the Pentagon to ensure that you guys are adopting some of these phenomenal technologies as rapidly as possible?
Yes, one of the things that I've learned as I was preparing for this confirmation process, and I'm not confirmed yet, so I don't want to presume that I'm going to get it, but, and I think it's obvious to anyone who's been in the department, who's worked with the Department of Defense, is that there is actually a law. There are regulations that say if there is a commercial option, you must try to use that first, for software, for hardware, for all kinds of things. And it's just not followed that rigorously. So what you end up doing is duplicating in a lot of areas. While the Navy might be doing something, the labs might be doing something that Google can be partnering with the Department of Defense on, or OpenAI could. And imagine the net waste that causes in the whole system. And now we're talking about a budget deficit and a debt that adds up. And you're looking for places where not only can we save some money, but we can save time. Saving time is a thing. And saving time is not something that's inherent in the DoD business model. It's about reducing risk to its smallest possible component at the expense of moving as fast as possible. And when you're in an AI race where every innovation could lead to tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions worth of value creation, or and you could think of value creation as a better defense shield, more deterrence. Every minute you're losing is costly. And so hopefully that ethic can be infused more into the DoD now than ever.
And part of it is kind of like a lack of risk-taking culture where it's not encouraged. If you're making a sort of portfolio of bets as a program manager, your expectation is that 10 out of 10 of those better succeed versus, you've been an investor, many of us around the room have. The expectation if you make a seed stage bet is definitely not that all 10 succeed. And in fact, if all 10 succeed, you're probably not taking enough risk. How do we start to incentivize risk-taking so that people want to take the bet on the commercial technologies?
Yeah, I mean, first, and this goes for companies, and you all this from running companies, you have to celebrate the successes for the people who have them. And there's a lot of successful people in government who've done some quite amazing things, and we should be celebrating that achievement. And you can't punish failure that much either, because by definition, if you have DARPA and if it's succeeding at every project, it's not trying hard enough. So it's got to be able to be failing at stuff. So you want people coming in with good ideas. But you do want to kill those ideas quickly when they're not working. And that's another thing government writ large is not good doing, right? You get an appropriation in the next year, you want more and more and more and more, even if it's not fulfilling its initial mandate. So I think there's some sunsetting of laws and appropriations you could do as a sort of broad concept. There's celebrating success, there's not punishing failure. And then there's has to be more partnership between what's available in the world and what do we need, as opposed to we need something that's always bespoke, because we don't need things that are always bespoke. We just don't. And as you're proving with your experiment with the national labs, and you have your model there. Well, that's a great thing for DoD and for OpenAI. There's a win-win there.
Yeah, Chris Brose, who's now at Anduril, used to be on Senator McCain's staff, wrote a great book. It's called The Kill Chain. But there's this line in it that has stuck with me forever when it comes to working with the government, which is, the government is not going to change until they realize there's something worse than change. And it's so instructive. And I think the whole value here is figuring out how we get there without something big and bad having to happen. And so much of this, in our experience at least, is just people adopting the tools, just trying it. And you start with basic things, and then you realize that these models are much more powerful. They're not just summarizing emails for you. They're actually doing things for you out on the web. They're saving you first 5 minutes and then an hour, making the workplace more efficient. And then, by the way, 3 months later, the models can do something brand new that you never would have realized unless you're using it on a daily basis. There's so much, but we just have to start taking the steps and get going.
I want to touch back on Secretary Burgum's, sort of opening remarks today, where he talked about in order to maintain this, sort of wave of AI innovation and staying at the forefront, there needs to be just like a complete revolution in how we think about, sort of energy production in the United States, the permitting of those types of, both, energy production facilities and data centers. Ruth, I know Alphabet, this morning actually published, sort of a policy paper outlining what you guys think are some of the, sort of policy changes that need to happen to ensure that we stay at the forefront of AI. Could you touch a bit on what your recommendations were this morning?
I thought Secretary Burgum's comments were fantastic, because I think it is very clear that to realize the potential of AI, you have to have the power to deliver it. And we have underinvested in this country, and to stay ahead, we need to actually address it head on. And so what we did is we released a paper this morning, and we drew from a body of work from a number of years. What we were looking for were the most broad-based policies, solutions that have the broadest base of support. And it really goes into a couple of different areas. Number one, we need additional sources of energy. We need to be investing in and leading with innovative solutions, in particular nuclear. When you look at what China's doing with nuclear relative to the US, it is very concerning. They have 30 gigawatts in production. They have 200 gigawatts, which is under development under consideration. And as Secretary Burgum said today, that's a 2030 solution, but 2030 will be here tomorrow. And we don't want to be sitting in this room in 5 years and not have the power that we need. So anything that can be additive is key. There's a lot of policy proposals out there that go to cost, permitting, they go to fuel sources that are key. The second that he addressed, which is absolutely critical, is the grid. We have a grid that is antiquated in many areas. We need to expand the capacity of the grid to have a more flexible grid. The Department of Energy last year put out a study that said there's up to 100 gigawatts of incremental capacity from our existing infrastructure if we just utilized it effectively, if we modernized it. And so again, a critical area. To upgrade the grid, we need more electrical workers in this country. And one of the things that Google has done for many years is digital skilling, looking at cybersecurity skills, data analytics skills. We obviously don't train electrical workers, so we partnered with Best in Class on the electrical side and have announced also a training program for electrical workers. And I think this is an example where collectively we need to pull from the body of work that's been done, get some things landed, because we need to ensure that we have the energy capacity to fuel this economic upside.
And then Kevin, obviously you guys had a ton of support from Secretary, sort of Burgum on your guys' Project Stargate, where you guys are doing a massive amount of, sort of capital allocation to, sort of building out data centers and energy production. Tell us what you can on how that's going.
I mean, so you kind of need four things to build a great frontier AI model. You need infrastructure, which is power and GPUs and so on. You need data, you need algorithms, and you need great talent. We can take care of the last three, but when you say, people ask sometimes, what's the thing you believe that other people don't believe? I think for OpenAI, one of those things is we believe in the exponential that is the increase in intelligence of these models and the corresponding value that we can provide back to all of you, all of your companies, the agencies that you work at, and so on. So we announced on, I believe, the second day of President Trump's tenure with President Trump, Sam Altman, Masa Son, and Larry Ellison in the Roosevelt Room that we were going to be putting $500 billion towards building out infrastructure here in the US. Power, data centers, GPUs, because the one thing that we've learned over and over and over again is that the more compute you apply to these models, the more you put in, the more intelligent the models are on the way out, and the more intelligent the models are, the more amazing things that we can build for all of you. So we're going to put everything we can into building infrastructure here in the US.
If I can build on his point about this is exponential, the best visual I keep coming back to is what Google has done with Google Translate. We now offer translation in 250 languages. It's been a 20-year journey. In the last year alone, we added 110 of that 250 languages. So you're chugging along and then you hit a vertical lift. The incremental cost to add languages continues to diminish. And what's very important when you then apply that to the workplace, what we're seeing in the public sector, in the private sector, is translation applied to customer support activities wherever you're going. It's not just about the cost savings from running a more effective call center, but what people are now seeing is they get the feedback loop from the queries that is enabling them to better design product assortment, identify where their weaknesses in their suite, define the direction for R&D. So there's a revenue and a cost benefit from it. In fact, when we went to Minnesota, they said, we need your help in 4 critical languages to get through a pipeline of services to deliver for constituents. Within 6 months, they said we need another 26 languages. So there are things that once you start, to Kevin's point, once you start, you hit this curve and you start seeing more and more opportunities that enrich the feedback loop that make you more productive.
Emil, I kind of want to sort of double click on the comment you made earlier around, we're in this era now in 2025 where, and obviously, sort of this conference represents the fact that, sort of Silicon Valley, the Hill, the Pentagon are hopefully, sort of coming closer together. But I'm curious from, your perspective of hopefully soon, sort of being in the Pentagon, is there any, sort of perception internally of like, well, what if this just turns out to be a fad? Like, is this Silicon Valley, sort of coming back to its roots, and we're here to be great collaborators, or is it, hey, it was this president, and this is sort of the thing that's the current thing, but we get to 2028 or 2030, and there's protests on Market Street, in San Francisco yet again, and the blue-haired, woke crazy people somehow take tech culture back over and make it so that nobody's allowed to work on important technologies, and so China just invades California.
Gosh, I hope not.
That really escalated, Delian.
I think, I do worry about that sometimes. I look at the last 4 years and the energy discussion was about green. It wasn't about abundance. And this whole abundance strategy that you're talking about could be turned off in a heartbeat depending on policies and intention and so on. So I hope that's not the case. I feel like part of this is educating Americans about the new competitive environment that we're in. Like people who are old enough remember the Cold War. This is a different kind of sort of rivalry, but it's real and it's impact. And you're seeing it with the tariff situation, and you'll see it. So I think as more Americans understand that this is a true national set of prerogatives that we have to pursue, hopefully there's no U-turns. Because if there are, we're in trouble. Because there are places we're behind in certain kinds of weaponry, like hypersonic missiles and so on. And falling behind on AI would be tragic. Falling behind on some of these things would be tragic. And we do not have the same powers that the Chinese government has to just say, oh, that's a great technology you built in your business. We're taking it or we're using it for our own purposes. We negotiate with our partners, and that there's a goodness to that. But it requires us to sort of, be on the same page as to what the goal is. So I hope.
One other thing Secretary Burgum said this morning is that economic strength is national security, is security strength. I would say tech strength is economic strength, is security strength. And completely agree, we have to get it right at home because it unlocks the upside at home, and we need to be doing that across the country. But it goes to our then ability to engage with allies, which I think is part of what you were touching on. Everywhere I go, I hear from heads of state, I will be a part of the digital transformation. I want to do it with the US, but if we're not there, they will be with China. And so that level of engagement is another critically important piece of the puzzle of keeping the US at the forefront.
Well, Emil, Ruth, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that this forum helps prevent any U-turns.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.